Thank you to Skillshare for sponsoring this video.
I feel like it was over 10 years ago that I went on eBay, saved up a couple $100s, and bought my first big MIDI controller, the Akai APC40. This thing is showing its age, but it's something I'm never gonna let go because this is an awesome controller. And I think plays an important role in like controllerism history. People even used to buy the APC40 and the APC20 and connect them together to make an APC60. It was the wild, wild west out there. But today, we've got the newest member of the APC family, the APC64, and I'm going to tell you all about it, compare it to some of the other options in Akai's own APC line, as well as some controllers from some other manufacturers, some alternatives. If you want to see a full comprehensive breakdown of the APC64, well, you can go find me over on Akai's YouTube channel where I did all of the launch content with some tutorials and user guide info so you can see each and every feature. That being said, this video is not sponsored by Akai, but if you think that that partnership is going to have some influence over what I say in my videos, just unsubscribe now and move on, because why would you watch a content creator whose morals and ethics you don't trust? And then you can go and sort my channel by reverse chronological, and you can see how long I've been doing the controllerism thing, which has informed everything I'm about to say about the APC64. To be honest, I was quite surprised to learn about the APC64. I figured we might be due for another big old APC40, which it seems that these two are meant to kind of live maybe not together, maybe you don't need both of these, but they've got separate use cases, which I'll talk about in a bit. So what is going on with the APC64 and how is it different from all of Akai's previous iterations in the APC line? Well, like the other APC controllers, this is a controller for Ableton Live. So at its base level, it's a clip launching controller. I can launch scenes, I can launch clips, I can stop all the clips, shift stop all. But of course, that's not all. Unlike the APC40, this controller is great for playing notes and chords. Going over to note mode here, and you're going to watch me use some of the other functionalities like arm tracks. Now, I've got a control grid for notes that you all probably recognize from all the other grid controllers. It's actually pretty simple. I can play a scale up the instrument or across. And chords, like triads, I can play with the triangle formation. This note mode can be configured in a bunch of ways. Again, utilizing that screen, I can change things like the root note, the arrangement of the notes, they're arranged by fourths. I can show out of scale notes and play fully chromatically, etc. This is a good point to talk about this screen because most controllers like this have this layout right here. Like Launchpads are notorious for this, where you can go into a configuration menu and you kind of have to memorize what all these things mean. And that's pretty intuitive with the top row here. You can see it kind of resembles a piano keyboard, so you can pick your root note, C or D or E. That's pretty intuitive, but all the other stuff, you could memorize it, or you could just scroll through all the options here on the screen with the encoder. So the encoder here is doing just enough where it doesn't impact it so much that this thing is going to draw like a lot of battery or need to be recharged or plugged in. It's still bus powered, and we get just enough configuration for it to be convenient and not too much that is kind of overdoing it from a screen standpoint. In addition to the note mode, we've got chord mode, which where a lot of other companies flounder with having their chord mode be sort of like separated from their note scale mode. All of these chords are in the key that you have set to. These can also be configured as well. So going into that configuration menu, I can change the type of scale. We're just playing basic 1-3-5 right now, but I can add things like sus chords or seventh chords, ninths. So here's some seventh chords. A really intuitive one-note chord mode, which I appreciate, especially on a grid instrument where you might not be so comfortable playing chords if you're used to, say, a piano. These notes have polyphonic aftertouch, meaning I can apply pressure and change those notes, but I can also do that with multiple notes. Do that individually for each note. That's pretty cool. The elephant in the room here, or the most obvious thing on the controller, which I'm most curious to see how you all will react, will be the fact that this thing features 8 touch strips and no encoders, no faders. Well, we've got the one encoder for menu navigation. Also, actually, clicking this encoder will turn on the metronome. So it's got a couple uses. But touch strips, I was skeptical at first. It does come with the advantage of this being a relatively low profile and very portable controller, very easy to put into a backpack, where this, like the APC 40 and other controllers, you might be a little more cautious as it's got those knobs sticking up. So is one of those going to snap off in your bag? How about these faders as well? So the touch strips are a creative approach and a new kind of approach, and I do kind of like them, though I do still struggle with some accuracy. If I use this encoder once again to scroll around my session, which is another thing it's very useful for, you can see I'm scrolling between the tracks. When I get over to the master track, I've got performance effects there. Now, the touch strips also changed to reflect the parameters of that rack, and also my master is blue, so these are appearing blue. So I've got stuff like my low pass filter here, so if I go ahead and play a scene, instantly dial in a lot of these effects. High pass, beat repeat. Now these are really easy when you're going from say the bottom all the way to the top, or the top all the way down, 0 to 100 versus 100 to 0. That's really easy. If I switch over to say volume mode, you're going to see the volume for the 8 tracks that I have here on screen. We're not usually going from 0 to 100 on the volume. We could be fading something in. So let's say I wanted to grab the volume for the main drum track here. I kind of have to be very careful and grab about where I need to go. And I guess in this case, I did a pretty good job. But it is something to practice and get used to, because you're not turning a knob that's exactly where you want it to be. You could accidentally press way up there, which there are MIDI takeover modes to prevent that. But it is a big difference between touch strips and faders and knobs. Something to consider. I don't hate the touch strips like I thought I might. The LED lights go a long way in helping you know what you're controlling. I'm going to jump back to device mode just to show you that while you're in device mode, you can use the arrow keys at the bottom here, and you can actually switch between the different items in your rack, like the different effects. So you're not stuck on just the first effects that are in a single rack. Like if I jump over to a different track, let me scroll over with my encoder, the Blue Lady, an electric keyboard instrument. Right now, I've got that particular instrument's macros selected. Put on that track. So I can use it as normal, dial in some delay or something like that. But what if I want to get over to that other rack? All I have to do is hold device and scroll over, follow that blue hand. And now I'm on basic audio processing, and I can change anything contained in that rack, like the reverb dry wet, for instance. The room size. You can see me kind of scanning along the touch strip to try to find my place so it can pick up from where it's left off in the rack before I touch the touch strips. So that's the biggest, newest thing. And I think it is impressive that Akai is doing something new. Not that touch strips are a new technology, but to kind of take a risk like that and not just iterate again on the APC 40, because this thing is kind of doing a lot and a lot of hands-on functionality, which is why I think this is supposed to be something different, not in competition with the APC 40. I'll go back to comparisons later. Recording is just as simple as it is with other Ableton Live controllers, so if you have a clear understanding of how recording in Ableton Live works, you'll be able to understand this. But let's say here on the drum rack, I want to record a new clip. I can press the record button. Launch that again. That was way off, right? Those off hi-hats. Let's solo that track. Luckily, we've got a quantize button here. Hold quantize, press that clip. Those notes will snap right into place. Another good use of this screen, because I can hold quantize and change the quantization amount. I can also use this to turn record quantize on and off, and that's an Ableton Live functionality where it automatically quantizes after you finish recording. And probably the most used button I have on any controller that has it, I think the Launch Key 37 and Push are the two that come to mind, but the undo button, the undo will be used so much, for me at least. I can hit Command Z faster than I can probably hit this button. That's like an animal instinct thing. That's not a criticism of the controller. But anyway, I can hold Shift and redo as well. So we've got undo and redo, which is really nice. We can also duplicate clips. So if I hold duplicate, I can duplicate that clip right there. I can also delete clips. Actually, as a matter of fact, let's go into that drum pattern. I can go back into note mode here. Let's say I wanted to get rid of the kick on this. I can hold clear and get rid of the kick in that pattern. Let's undo that. That could be a performance technique, but another thing here is like I could duplicate this clip, Now we've got one with a kick. So now let's go back into note mode. Let's clear the kick. So that's a workflow thing where now I can create multiples of the same clip, variations of the same clip, all from the controller without having to touch the mouse, which I think is pretty impressive. I can hold shift and select a clip without launching it. So let me make sure I'm having that clip selected. And now let's go ahead and launch it for real. I can hold shift and record, which puts us into MIDI overdub mode, which means anything I record now. Those notes are now recorded into the MIDI piano roll, and they were bad. So let's hit undo and just get rid of them altogether. And probably the best feature for me and probably any of you out there who are doing any type of live looping, especially my guitar players or people who need hands-free looping, we have a fixed length button. Now, fixed length is really important if you want to do hands-free looping. With MIDI, you can create an empty MIDI clip of however long you want and record into it and not have to punch in and punch out of recording. You cannot do that with audio. You can't make an empty audio clip and record into it. Fixed length is unique. I'm thinking like Push is the only controller I can think of that has fixed length. There must be another one, maybe some of the launch keys. But let's go ahead and arm this guitar track I have here so I can kind of demonstrate this. Let's be in the correct monitoring mode. So now I'm going to press that encoder, turn my metronome back on. I'm going to press fixed length recording to turn it on. Now, don't forget, the screen does come in handy again here because I can hold fixed length and I can set how long I want this loop to be. Do we want it to be 1 bar, 2 bars, or all the way up to 32? So now all I have to do, and I'm going to make this very simple, we'll record 2 bars at tempo and it will automatically loop around. So let's do that. And it's automatically looped for us. So useful in a live performance setting when it comes to audio, and a lot more convenient than having to create empty clips or having to come up with another solution, use the looper for audio, for instance. More controllers need this fixed length feature. So you've probably seen me using this bottom row of buttons here, which has multiple functionalities. You can record arm, you can mute, you can solo, you can stop clips. It's pretty straightforward. There's creative ways you can use things like mute other than just, a technical... Oh, that guitar actually kind of fits here. I've got these clips as just one shots. So for instance, I could like mute these 4 tracks. 1, 2, 3, 4. And just hit that one shot or something like that. Of course, if you're working on music and you're like, dang, I really want to be able to not hear that triangle, you can do that. We've got solo options as well. Solo the drums, solo the triangle, and clip stop. So you don't even have to be in session view to stop your clips. Of course, you can always stop all clips by holding shift and stop all. I always go up here for the shift button for whatever reason. I feel like shift is going to be such a used button that it needs to be like the bottom-most button. I don't think that makes a ton of sense from a design point here, but it either needs to be like quick access here at the top, quick access at the bottom or something, not like in the middle here. Slight design critique there. I want to tell you a little bit about the step sequencer that is in this thing, as well as compare it to some other controllers that are around. But first, let me tell you about today's sponsor, Skillshare. You see this hoodie and like these stickers that have been on the desk the whole time? I drew these myself. And so aside from being a musician, I really wanted to expand my skills into visual arts. And that is something that I did recently or over the past few years with Skillshare. Skillshare is an online community for creatives where millions come together to take the next step in their creative journey. They've got a learn by doing approach. A lot of the classes actually have projects that you can work on, and you can see some of the projects other students have worked on right on the class page. So whether you are trying to learn music to use all this gear that we're talking about today, music production, or trying to do visual art, or also trying to start a new career where you might want to go into something more entrepreneurial than your day job, Skillshare has classes for that. And if I'm talking music specifically, I know there's a great class by LNA, who is an Ableton certified trainer, teaching you the ins and outs of Ableton Live and music production. Like I mentioned at the top, when I first started doing watercolor painting, I was taking some of the beginner classes in watercolor painting, which are really fantastic. And I've also been dabbling in a lot of the drawing classes as well, so that I can do things like come up with my own cool merch. And as you all know, when you support the sponsor, you support the channel. So today, the first 500 of my subscribers who use the link in the description will get a better offer than we've actually ever offered here on this channel. You'll get your first 30 days free and 40% off your first year of membership at Skillshare. You can take advantage of one of Skillshare's best discount offers yet. And when you support the sponsor, you are supporting the channel. If you all are looking to take on an alternate skill other than music, I would love to hear about what that is. It's been transformative for me creatively, delving into the visual arts, and Skillshare makes it easy to pick up one of those other new skills. All right, now let's get into talking about step sequencing. All right, so a built-in step sequencer here. That is unique from a lot of MIDI controllers. I feel as though Ableton, well, I feel like I know this actually, that Ableton kind of keeps their step sequencer coding, is that what you would say, proprietary to their push. So what's actually happening here is we're not using the step sequencer like Push's step sequencer. It's a little bit different, and I'll explain how. Let me go to session view and just shift click that empty clip so it's a slot that we can record into eventually. So if I go and arm our drums, right now our step sequencer is in note mode. I can change that, of course, with a bunch of other functionality to drum mode. So now we have a drum kit, and I can hold shift. I can preview all of those sounds. Let me jump into volume really quick and just bring the volume of the drums up a bit more so you can hear them loud and clear. Shift. I'm previewing those sounds. So now, like you would imagine, well, actually, I just recorded that note in. Let me actually unarm the track while I'm in the step sequencer, hold clear and get rid of that note, and put them in like in a traditional way. 4 to the floor kick, right? Now let me show you this. I think this is really cool. I haven't seen this on other step sequencers, but the harder I hit a note in the sequence, that velocity information is translated. Or a little skippy beat there. So that velocity info is transmitted. I can also change the velocity. I can like lock it in at a certain level. I can also select a note and change its velocity while in velocity mode. So that's pretty cool. And as you saw, I mistakenly before had the track armed, and while the sequence is playing, when the track is armed in the step sequencer specifically, you can record in live. That's only while the step sequencer track is recorded. And there are multiple step sequencer tracks. So you could set each step sequencer track to a different MIDI channel and run it to different virtual instruments in Ableton Live, or you could take advantage of the MIDI and CV gate ports, the outputs on the back of the unit, and sequence a bunch of outboard gear. You can also use this controller completely standalone. So you can use that step sequencer completely standalone without Ableton Live. So I think it can be a great controller for hardware. I'm not a hardcore hardware person, but it seems like very capable. So we've got that sequence going, right? But this sequence is not actually recorded into Ableton Live. We are currently just sending notes to Ableton Live. So all we got to do to get this clip over to Ableton Live is hold shift, press the encoder, and as long as we have an empty clip slot selected, that clip is now printed to a clip essentially in Ableton Live. So I can launch that now. It's there. We're kind of like doubling it now by sending the step sequencer at the same time. So I'm going to just hold clear and clear track 1 of the step sequencer. Now that is playing as a clip here in Ableton Live. So it's not the perfect implementation, and that is a result of Ableton like really guarding that feature for their own hardware, but it's the best that I've seen, which doesn't require you to install a bunch of Max for Live devices or do some weird backend stuff to get a step sequencer to work. A thing that they've been trying to do, or a thing that people have been trying to do since the APC 40. A couple more quick things about the step sequencer. Let's record in. We also have probability and mutate. So by selecting the actual note that we entered in there, we can now see the red value. Let's set these all to a much lower probability percentage by holding them and entering them in. You can see that the brightness of the pad on the sequence changes relative to how probable it is to happen. Now, some notes are happening, some notes are not happening. Let me scroll quickly over to a melodic instrument so I can show you mutate as well. For this, I'll go into another track of the step sequencer, and I'll first clear that initial sequence we just did. So I've gone into track 3 of the step sequencer, just so I can show you mutate. Same function applies. I can enter in notes here. We're entering these all in under the probability page, which is why they're red. If I switch to velocity, we could enter them in at a specific velocity. So that's a bunch of random notes. If I deselect the specific note, I can see the full step sequence. Now, just like with velocity probability, we can go into mutate and we can adjust whether or not the note will play as played, an octave up or an octave below. So let me just do 100% mutation. Let's find our notes here. Now, another criticism I might have is this gets quite dim. I am in a very well-lit studio at the moment, so when the lights are at their dimmest, it's kind of hard to see. But let's see this. So you can see now that all these notes are playing at different octaves each time. And now I can send this melodic loop as a clip as well. So why don't we go ahead and make sure we have the proper track selected and then go back into the step sequencer. Yep, our sequence is still there. Then I can hold shift, press enter. Now we have that as a clip. And since we had probability settings in there, it just did one pass through all those probability settings and it'll be locked to that. We could print a bunch of other clips and the probability settings would be different each time we printed it. So a pretty robust step sequencer. Another cool thing is we have settings or MIDI routings or note mode configurations, chord mode configurations that we like. We can save that as an internal project on the APC64. This will also save your sequences and you can chain sequences together. Hardware people, let me know if that is robust enough or if you're looking at other controllers and saying, it's lacking that and it's lacking that. I would like to know in the comments. Let's get into comparisons though. I've been referencing the OG APC40, or not the OG, the APC40 Mark II. This controller is specifically for, I think, someone who's doing more of a typical DJ set or somebody who's gonna use this with a companion controller, something to enter in notes. You're not really gonna be entering in notes with this thing. You're mostly gonna be changing from song to song, launching clips, dialing in effects, bringing in levels in and out. I mean, it's even got a crossfader, which is, typical for traditional DJing. It's a fantastic controller if you are performing that way. On the same note, Akai also released an APC Mini, which is the mini version of that APC40. They included a note mode and a drum mode on this thing, but they're pretty terrible. There's no velocity sensitive pads on this. It's good if you just want a smaller controller to launch clips and do some controlling with faders, and note playing is secondary, but it's not great if you need a primary note controller. Still useful in live performances for what it is good at, which is launching clips and different functions for the faders, as well as the row function buttons. Now, probably my favorite controller Akai has made in a while is the APC key. This is great if you can tolerate not having drum pads, like the MPK Mini, the proper one. Because we got that session grid, you can play drums on the keys, no problem, in my personal opinion. Not the same thing as playing as on pads, but it's pretty similar. And if you really want to be able to control Ableton Live and launch clips and do a set, I've done a performance where I just did this one completely solo, and I think it worked out quite well. So how about some other brands though? I think this is most directly competing with the latest iteration of the Launchpad Pro. This thing has MIDI sequencing capabilities as well with 2 MIDI outputs on the back. And it has a lot of similar functionality like the fixed length recording, which I praised on the APC64. It's even got capture MIDI on here. The drawback of this, as you can see, if I lay this like this, it's kind of just like almost the same thing, but without the touch strips. The touch strips go a long way because if you want to adjust things like your devices or your volumes or whatever, you have to jump out of session view, jump out of note mode to be able to adjust those, and you're adjusting them with pads and you're using velocity to do that. So the harder you hit, the faster the fader will go down. It's an interesting approach, but you are having to go through pages rather than this. You could be in note mode and changing devices and changing your mix all at the same time. It's just a little more convenient, but Launchpad Pro is still a great controller. and there's a lot of overlap between these two. If I'm not doing a session where I'm deliberately trying to keep it simple and use a single controller, you're usually going to see me use multiple controllers. So if the APC64 seems like a little bit too complicated, or like you can't do all the things you want to do at once, I would think another layer of competition would be pairing different controllers together. Like maybe you don't need the full Launchpad Pro, but the Launch Control XL gives you all the faders and knobs that you would have gotten on the APC40 that are now just touch strips on the APC64. Like pairing controllers together, possibly even pairing two controllers that come out to be cheaper than the APC64, could be used to great effect. There's a little bit of an elephant in the room, and I know people are going to jump on this narrative, and it's not a perfect one, but let's just say we all know that Ableton released a monster of a controller and a standalone machine in the Push 3. And everybody knows about the price of this thing. So it would seem like the APC64, though it does not have nearly the same capabilities as a standalone machine as the Push. Like you can't compare having Ableton inside of this box and being able to write and take all of your Ableton instruments, samples, and everything in an on-the-go device. You can't compare that to the APC64. However, for those of you who aren't all that thrilled with the standalone functionality of Push 3 and could actually do without standalone functionality like that, the APC64 is a great choice at quite a lower price range. So for Akai, I think it's good timing on the competition. If you're not ready for a big pro device like this thing, this APC64 is capable of so much. If you're gonna have your laptop anyway, you might as well use an APC64. That being said, Ableton literally made the Push 3, so there's some things that just work a little smoother on Ableton Push 3, but this is the closest Akai has come to a really great controller device that covers a lot of note functionality and being able to play instruments rather than just being able to, do some mixing and launching. That's going to be my first impressions of the APC64. I've spent a lot of time with it. I want to build some sets with it as well. So stay tuned for this channel for that. Subscribe. Let me know what you think of this controller in the comments down below. Shout out to all my members, and thank you to Skillshare once again for sponsoring this video. By the way, if you could all like the video on your way out, it's much appreciated. It helps more people find the channel, find the video, if at least you thought I did a good explanation. Let me know if you're picking one of these up, by the way. That's going to be it for now. Thank you all so much for watching. This has been TAETRO. Have a good one.